Actually, first of all, I was pleased that when John Baird consulted opposition leaders last Wednesday, he called me as well as Tom Mulcair and Justin Trudeau. I was able to reach Justin Trudeau before I talked to John Baird just to compare notes with him. Wasn't able to reach Tom Mulcair, but we were more or less on the same page that we thought Parliament should be convened to discuss the issue, even if we weren't deciding on a military engagement. We don't agree on many other aspects of it. When I talked to John Baird about it, I told him that our view was that we should not be engaged or support a U.S. action in the absence of a UN resolution that made it a legal engagement. Obviously, there are big problems because we know that on the Security Council, Russia and China are allies of Assad. I mean, this is a very complicated situation, and I don't mean to make it sound easy by trying to give a quick answer. But potentially, you know, if we're the number one reason, from my point of view, to intervene in Syria, and I wish in many ways we'd found ways to do this 2 years ago, is to protect the lives of innocent civilians. And Assad and the rebel forces are increasingly contaminated with Al-Qaeda forces, foreign Al-Qaeda forces in Syria. So between the two sides, a lot of innocent civilians have been killed, over 100,000 people. And and some of my constituents with family in Syria, I've been desperately trying to get help from the Canadian Embassy in Turkey, and Lebanon, where Syrians with connections to Canada have gone to our embassy to try to get help and can't get a meeting, can't get past the security guards outside. A whole family of Syrians with family in Saanich-Gulf Islands got to Turkey and stayed there as long as they could, couldn't get help from the Canadian Embassy, couldn't get into the refugee camp, and ended up, I thought I'd found a route to get them help, but they went back into Syria because they were out of money and had no other place to go. So this is, there's much more that we can do in humanitarian assistance. So that's a short answer too long for a short answer, but given the conflict in Syria, that was too short. It's very complex. And this is one of the places where I lament that we made a huge mistake in Libya. Now, I spoke on the floor of the House of Commons to explain why I was going to be the only member of Parliament to vote against continued bombardment of Libya in June 2011.
Bravo.
And thank you. It was odd being the only one, but the reasons that I gave at the time were that it's important to have the legitimacy of this emerging doctrine of responsibility to protect. I think it's an important emerging doctrine, and we went into Libya not against Gaddafi, right? We said when we got involved in Libya that this was about protecting civilian lives in Libya under the responsibility to protect doctrine. And on the first vote, that was before I was elected, earlier in 2011, the second vote 3 months later was in June 2011, and now we were being asked to vote for continued aerial bombardment of Libya. And we were no longer talking about responsibility to protect because John Baird was saying, well, sure, there's peace plans being brought forward, but a fundamental precondition to us agreeing to stop the bombing is that Gaddafi has to go. So they shifted from responsibility to protect to regime change. And I went back to check because I actually did say on the floor of the House of Commons 2 years ago that if we do this, if we allow responsibility to protect to be used as a sham Trojan horse for regime change, we will never be able to use it where we're going to need it in Syria, where the conflict is beginning there. And if we could have brought it, there was a peace plan brought forward by Zuma from South Africa. Gaddafi said he would live with it. I mean, people can be cynical and say, how do we know he would live with it? He probably wouldn't have. But we didn't try. We sided with the rebels in Libya. Libyan rebels were also full of Al-Qaeda. And there were warehouses full of surface-to-air missiles and rocket launchers and weapons of all kinds that immediately went into the hands of Al-Qaeda and ended up in Mali, right, within months. So we weren't paying attention to the goal of protecting civilian lives. We decided to choose sides and say Gaddafi has to go. I'm not defending Gaddafi any more than I defend Assad. But if your motivation is to protect civilian life, then you grab onto any peace proposal with both hands, and you get in UN peacekeepers, and the UN peacekeepers should, by the way, be guarding the warehouses so that they don't end up going full of armaments, don't immediately go to Al-Qaeda. And so that we don't have retributional racial killings, which happened in Libya. The African migrant workers were immediately being slaughtered after Gaddafi went. So the situation in Syria, the reason Syria has gone on so long, that over 100,000 people have been killed, and the West hasn't done anything, and the world hasn't done anything, is that we so bungled Gaddafi and Libya and responsibly protect there, that we no longer had tools that could be used.